What would you do if you found a wild animal caught in your fence? Most would call someone and walk away. But one old farmer did the unthinkable. On a quiet morning, in a remote valley surrounded by pine woods, a farmer named Eli noticed something unusual near his pasture. The sheep were restless, the birds silent. When he approached the fence, he froze. A bear cub. Its tiny body twisted between the iron wires. Bleeding. Breathing heavily. Eyes full of panic and trust. The mother was nowhere in sight. Eli wasn't a wildlife expert. He wasn't a rescuer. He was just a man with calloused hands, an aching back, and a quiet respect for the land. But that day, something stirred inside him, a kind of courage that comes not from training, but from heart. What he did next surprised everyone, especially the rangers. This is a story of instinct, sacrifice, and the bond that can form when compassion beats fear. When a farmer stood between a helpless cub and the unknown, and changed the course of both their lives forever. Stick around. Because the ending? The morning mist still clung low over the fields when Eli stepped out onto his porch, thermos in one hand, old leather boots scraping against the creaky floorboards. His farm had always been quiet. Too quiet, some would say. But that was how Eli liked it. No drama, no noise. Just the rhythm of seasons, crops, and livestock. At 67, Eli wasn't the type to complain. Life had worn him down, sure, but it hadn't broken him. His back hurt more than it used to, and his hands were rougher than old bark. But he moved with the ease of a man who belonged to the land. As he sipped his coffee and scanned the horizon, something stirred. The sheep were clustered tightly in one corner of the field, restless, agitated. That wasn't normal. His dog Buck was sniffing along the fence line with his ears perked high and tail low, the way he got when something was wrong. Eli narrowed his eyes. The fog blurred the edges of the pasture, but he could just make out a strange shape tangled in the fence near the edge of the woods. At first, he thought it might be a raccoon or maybe a young deer that had panicked. But as he walked closer, heart starting to beat a little faster, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, caught in the metal wire, was a bear cub. Small, maybe 7 or 8 months old. Its fur was matted with mud and a streak of dried blood across its shoulder. The cub was breathing hard, chest rising and falling with sharp, quick gasps. Its leg was caught between 2 strands of barbed wire, twisted painfully. Its eyes, though wide with fear, were locked on Eli's. It didn't growl. It didn't move. It just looked, terrified, and tired. Eli's first instinct was to back away slowly. This was dangerous. Where there's a cub, there's usually a mother. And no creature on earth is more protective, or more lethal, than a mother bear with a missing cub. But something about the way the little bear lay there, vulnerable, quiet, defeated, made him hesitate. He took a cautious step forward. "Easy now," he whispered, voice low, soft like he was talking to a scared foal. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The cub flinched but didn't lash out. It simply whined, a low, heart-wrenching sound that twisted Eli's gut in a way he hadn't felt in years. Logic told Eli to walk away. To call the local ranger office and let the professionals handle it. That's what any sane man would do. But something deeper pushed him forward. Maybe it was the cub's eyes, or maybe it was something older, something primal, a recognition of pain and helplessness. Eli had seen that look once before. In the mirror. After his wife passed, after his only son stopped calling, after the barn fire that nearly ended everything he'd built, that same expression had stared back at him from sunken eyes and hollow cheeks. He knew what it meant to be stuck, to be scared and alone. And he couldn't turn his back on that. He crouched low and slowly pulled the thick gloves from his pocket. "Let's see what mess you've gotten yourself into, huh?" The cub whimpered again, its back leg trembling. The wire had coiled tightly around the joint, cutting off circulation and biting deep into the skin. Eli worked carefully, using a pair of rusted old fence cutters he'd kept since forever. Every snap of the wire sent a jolt of tension through the air. The cub stayed mostly still, though it trembled violently and made a noise that sounded like half a cry, half a growl. Buck stood nearby, silent and alert, as though understanding this was no ordinary day. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of slow, deliberate work, the last piece of barbed wire fell away. The cub didn't run. It just collapsed, panting, eyes fluttering. It was exhausted, too weak to even stand. Eli reached out, hesitated, then gently ran a hand over its side. "You're just a baby," he whispered. And at that moment, the farmer made a decision. Eli never planned on bringing wild animals into his barn. It had been built for horses and hay, not wild creatures with claws and teeth. But as he looked down at the unconscious bear cub on the ground, shivering from blood loss and shock, he knew there wasn't a choice anymore. The cub was too weak to move. Its breathing was shallow, its paw still trembling where the wire had been. Leaving it out in the cold would be a death sentence. He moved fast, in that steady, deliberate way only farmers could. He fetched a wool blanket from the barn loft, one he hadn't touched since Ruth was alive, and laid it across the hay. Then he grabbed a long-handled shovel, not to threaten, but just in case instinct kicked in once the cub woke up. With a grunt and a deep breath, he gently scooped the cub into his arms. It was heavier than it looked. Still small by bear standards, but solid with muscle and fat built for the winter. Blood matted its rear leg, and it winced even in sleep as Eli stepped across the threshold of the barn. Buck followed closely behind, ears back, watching silently. Eli placed the cub on the blanket, then backed off. The barn door creaked shut behind him, and for a moment he just stood there, a man who had lived decades without children, holding a baby that belonged to the wilderness. He sighed, scratching his beard. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered. He wasn't a vet. But he knew enough. Over the years, he'd patched up sheep, stitched open wounds, even nursed an injured fox back to health once. That was different. This was a bear. Still, he couldn't leave the leg untreated. He cleaned the wound with warm water and iodine, wrapped it in old gauze, and set a bowl of water nearby. The cub stirred only slightly, never opening its eyes. Eli backed away, returning every few minutes to check. At one point, the cub let out a soft growl, weak, confused, but never lashed out. The hours ticked by slowly. Snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in white again. At dusk, Eli opened the barn door one last time, carrying a pan of warm milk mixed with crushed blueberries. He didn't know if bears even liked blueberries, but Ruth always said they were good for healing. The cub had opened its eyes. They blinked slowly, focusing on him. No fear now. Just tiredness. Just trust. It didn't move as he set the pan down, but the nose twitched once. Eli stepped back. "Take your time, little one," he said. "You're safe now." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat in his kitchen, sipping cold tea and staring out the frosted window. His thoughts drifted. To his wife Ruth's warm hands, the way she used to sing when she cooked. To the son who left for the city 20 years ago and never came back. To the fire that took the old barn, and almost took him too. Loss was a funny thing. It changed people, made some bitter, made others soft. Eli had chosen to become quiet, to live in rhythm with the land and forget about the pain. But now a wild animal, a creature born for the mountains, was lying in his barn like a lost child. And something in his heart stirred. At first light, Eli opened the barn door, expecting silence. But the cub was sitting upright now, weak but alert. Its eyes followed him as he stepped inside. The pan of milk had been half finished. A good sign. "Well, you're tougher than you look," Eli said with a gentle grin. The cub let out a low grumble, not a threat, more like acknowledgement. Then it did something that surprised him. It reached out a paw, clumsy and slow, and placed it just barely on the edge of his boot. Eli froze. He looked down at the little paw, then knelt slowly. "Guess we're in this together, huh?" By the third day, the cub was eating more, walking with a limp, and sleeping curled in the corner of the barn like it had lived there all its life. Eli had begun calling it Willow, after the tree outside the barn that somehow survived every storm. But Eli knew he couldn't keep a wild bear forever. Not even a cub. He picked up the landline that hadn't rung in a month and called the local ranger station. It was a hard decision, not because he wanted to hide Willow, but because part of him feared what might happen next. Wild animals in captivity? Government rules? Euthanasia, even? Still, the cub deserved a chance. 2 days later, a green truck with Wildlife Authority printed on the door pulled into his long gravel drive. Out stepped Ranger Dana, tall, serious, mid-30s, and all business. She was followed by a younger assistant with a clipboard. "You're Eli Barnes?" she asked. "I am," he said. "Cubs in the barn." She raised a brow. "You're calm for someone harboring a bear." Eli chuckled. I didn't exactly invite her for tea. The Rangers followed him to the barn, where Willow lay resting on a blanket, licking her paw. She perked up when she saw Eli, then the strangers, and immediately growled. "Whoa," the assistant whispered. "She's protective." "Not of herself," Eli said. "Just doesn't trust easily." Ranger Dana crouched low, studying the cub's leg, the feed pan, the bedding. She looked impressed, then conflicted. "You did everything right," she said softly. "But you're not supposed to." Dana stood up and folded her arms. "Technically, what you've done violates wildlife protection codes. No civilian is allowed to keep a bear, not even to nurse it back to health." "I didn't keep her," Eli replied. "She came to me." She paused. "She was going to die," he added. "You think I should have watched that happen?" "No," Dana said. "But that's not how the system works." Eli met her eyes. "Then maybe the system needs a kick in the teeth." They stared at each other for a long moment. The barn was quiet, but for the sound of the cub gently chewing on hay. Finally, Dana sighed. "We'll take her to a sanctuary. One of the good ones. No cages. Forest access. Other bears. That's the best I can promise." When they opened the carrier cage, Willow backed into the far corner of the barn. Eli crouched beside her. "She's scared," he said. "I'd be too," Dana admitted. Eli placed his hand on Willow's shoulder gently. "You're gonna be okay, girl. You're going somewhere better now." Willow leaned into his hand. The moment stretched. The assistant took a slow step forward with a tranquilizer dart ready, but Eli held up a hand. "No need." He whispered something to the cub. No one else heard what. But she walked into the cage. Willingly. Eli watched as the truck pulled away, his heart heavier than he expected. Buck sat beside him, ears low, tail unmoving. "She'll be fine," he said aloud, maybe to himself more than the dog. "She'll have others now." The house felt emptier that night. Too quiet again. The blanket in the barn still smelled faintly of pine and fir. Weeks passed. Eli returned to his routine, feed the sheep, repair fences, boil tea twice a day like always. But something had changed. The barn was still full of hay, and the field still echoed with birdsong, yet a certain silence hung in the air. It wasn't just that Willow was gone. It was that she'd taken something with her, a strange unspoken presence that had filled the space between Eli and the world. It had only lasted a week, but in that week, something inside him had opened again. He found himself looking toward the woods more often. And sometimes, late at night, he swore he heard something rustling near the edge of the trees. One frosted morning, Eli stepped out to check on the feed troughs when he noticed tracks, small round imprints in the snow leading from the edge of the woods toward the fence line. Not a dog's. Not a deer's. Bear prints. Cub-sized. His breath caught in his throat. "Buck," he called. The dog ran to his side, sniffed the ground, then whined. He circled the prints, then followed them toward the barn, not with fear, but with recognition. Eli followed too. The prints stopped just outside the barn doors. Inside, everything was untouched, except the blanket. It had been moved. That night, Eli left a bowl of water and a few apples near the fence where he'd first found Willow. He didn't expect anything to happen. But in the morning, the apples were gone. The bowl tipped over. Fresh prints in the frost. He stared toward the forest, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He called Dana. "I think she's back." The ranger hesitated. "That's not typical. Rehabbed cubs don't usually return to humans. Especially not voluntarily." "Well," Eli said, "this one might be the exception." That evening, Dana visited. They walked the property quietly, following tracks that circled the barn, the porch, and even the back of the house. "She knows you," Dana said, almost in awe. "She trusted me," Eli replied. 2 nights later, Eli left the barn door cracked open. At 3 a.m., something woke him, a whisper of movement, a shift in the wind. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The door was wide open now. Inside, curled up on the old blanket, lay Willow. Not a cub anymore, noticeably bigger, stronger, but still with the same soft eyes. She didn't growl. Didn't flinch. She was home. Just for the night. Eli didn't step closer. He just sat nearby, watching. The moonlight spilled through the rafters, catching in the frost on the wooden beams. Buck lay down beside him. None of them made a sound. By the following week, the story had quietly spread. Not through the internet or newspapers. Eli didn't post or share anything, but through word of mouth. A local park ranger hiking through the hills spotted Willow just outside Eli's land, walking confidently, limping only slightly. But what stood out was how she behaved, calm around humans, never aggressive, even protective. When she was spotted a second time near the edge of a trail, almost guiding a lost hiker back toward the marked path, the ranger called Dana. She drove out again. This time, she wasn't just curious. She was concerned. Eli welcomed Dana into the kitchen, a rare gesture. She looked around at the simple home, noting the photos of Ruth on the wall, the dusty radio in the corner, and a steaming kettle on the stove. "I heard she came back," she said, sipping the offered tea. "She never left in her heart," Eli replied. "Only needed to grow strong enough to return." Dana raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like she's yours." "She isn't mine," Eli said. "She's her own. But maybe I'm hers." The ranger didn't laugh. Instead, she set down her mug and leaned in. "Eli, she's a wild animal. No matter what bond you have, it's not safe for her to get too comfortable around humans. I haven't touched her. I don't feed her anymore. She comes when she wants. And if the next person she approaches isn't kind?" Eli nodded slowly. He knew that risk. But before Dana could continue, there was a sound from outside, deep, slow, and unmistakable. A low, huffing breath. Willow was at the porch, watching. Dana stepped carefully to the window and peered out. The bear stood still, not threatening, not begging, just present. "She came to find me," Eli said softly. "She came here," Dana replied, in awe. "Like she's checking in." Buck, the old dog, went to the door, wagging once. Willow lowered her head, then turned and slowly walked back toward the trees. Not running. Not frightened. Just leaving. Peacefully. Dana turned back to Eli. "I've never seen anything like it." "She remembers," he said. "She forgives." That afternoon, Dana made a call. Not to remove Willow. Not to relocate her again. But to protect the land around Eli's farm, marking it temporarily as a non-interference zone, a rare title allowing observation without engagement, used only when animals reintroduce themselves safely into a wild but watched area. "You're not a sanctuary, Eli," she said before she left. "But maybe, you're something better." "I'm just a man who couldn't walk away," he said. She smiled. Sometimes, that's exactly what nature needs. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow melted into creeks that ran clear and fast through the woods. The trees came alive with songbirds and blossoms. Eli planted early this year, his knees aching, but his hands steady. There was peace again, not the kind born from solitude, but the kind that follows understanding. Every few days, tracks would appear near the back pasture. Sometimes just one set. Sometimes more. He never saw Willow directly for a while. But he knew she was out there. Watching. Safe. Free. Then one evening in early May, Eli stepped outside and saw something that nearly brought him to his knees. Willow was standing at the tree line, not alone. Beside her, wobbling slightly and blinking in the sunlight, were two tiny bear cubs. Eli stood frozen. Willow didn't move, but she looked at him. Not with fear. Not with a need for help. With trust. And pride. She had made it. She had survived. She had become what life had nearly taken from her, a mother. And somehow, in the wildness of it all, she wanted him to know. He didn't step forward. He simply raised a hand slowly, palm up. A silent gesture. Willow let out a soft sound, a low rumble from deep in her chest, and turned back into the forest, her cubs stumbling after her through the ferns. That summer, Eli built a small bench beneath the willow tree near the barn. He sat there most evenings with Buck, watching the edge of the forest. Sometimes he saw shadows moving among the trees. Sometimes he found paw prints near the creek. And once, just once, he woke to find the bowl he left out filled, not with food, but with smooth river stones and a single wildflower. As if Willow had left him a gift. Ranger Dana visited once more and smiled when he told her. She didn't just survive, she said. She remembered how she survived. Eli nodded, watching the trees. One evening, as fireflies danced and the wind carried the scent of pine, Eli sat on his porch and whispered, "Thank you, girl." He wasn't sure what he was thanking her for anymore. For the chance to save something. For the return of a forgotten part of himself. For reminding him that even in grief, life still blooms, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a reunion between two broken souls, one covered in fur, the other in years. One wounded by wire, the other by time. They met in pain. They parted in trust. And they lived, separately, wildly, yet forever connected.